And that, my friends, is how America was made great once again. Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics. Radio broadcaster master, now the celeb on the web. He's the smarty of the party. He's in cahoots with the grassroots. Jimmy at the Crossroads brings you thought-provoking commentary, hard-hitting interviews, original satire, and the best bumper music known to man. Jimmy at the Crossroads!
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. People want answers, they want to understand. They come to the crossroads and Jimmy gives them the plan. I said, gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Hello, my friends, and welcome to another edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, your host for the program, bringing you engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style, on this Thursday, April 30th. The only show, I think, I don't know this for sure, but I think, certainly in the realm of politics and economics talk, where the host plays his own intro song. Of course, I am on the harmonica. You saw it. We have fun. Biff Gore, tremendous musician, season 6 of The Voice. Gotta love the ambassador of soul, Biff Gore, who wrote that song with me. Okay, I'll admit, he was the primary writer of the song, providing the great vocals. Mixed and mastered, that song was, by Scott Mitchell, who also threw in some bass and drums for us. Welcome to the show once again. Great to have you with us. Coming up a little later, we got a feel-good COVID-19 story. Yeah, they're out there. Dave Weinberg will join us. He is handles operations for Kosher 19, which is a nonprofit providing meals to hospital workers, particularly in a number of states on the East Coast. And I'm looking forward to talking with Dave about that and what Kosher 19 is doing to provide kosher meals to those who are on the front lines as healthcare workers helping to save lives. Rick Newman will join us as well. He is columnist at Yahoo Finance. And Rick, great guy, always an interesting perspective, a different perspective from Rick Newman when we have him on. We're looking forward to, I think this will be his second appearance on Jimmy at the Crossroads. We're going to talk a little bit about Trump versus Amazon. Will he defeat Amazon by trying to gut their deal with the post office? And also, to what extent is this Republican president and this Republican Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, to what extent are they big government Republicans, the biggest government Republicans that we've ever seen? Rick Newman has an answer to that question. We'll talk with him about that. But first, here on the show, I want to talk a little bit about Gretchen Whitmer and what's happening in the state of Michigan. Yesterday, Governor Whitmer had a press conference, and I believe this is cut 8. And here's just a little taste of what she had to say about the progression of things.
We are flattening the curve. We do have reasons to feel like the work that we've done is paying off. As we re-engage, we have to do so slowly. This is not a political conversation. This is not a political negotiation. This is about the public health. That's precisely what these emergency powers are all about. And so as I use them, we cite all the sources of that power so that people understand this is the very kind of crisis that they are used in. I don't enjoy using all of these levers of this office, but I have to do this to save lives, and that is what centers every decision we've made. I know that it's hard. I know that people are stressed out, that people are feeling squirrely from being at home so much with their family. I know that people are worried about getting a job so that they can pay their bills, or whether or not their small business is going to make it. I have those same fears, and yet I know we can't make decisions based on feeling and fear. We have to go with the facts and the science. Lives are depending on this, and ultimately our economic health is depending on us getting this right.
So that's Governor Whitmer of Michigan, who has had some of the most draconian policies. I guess she's slowly opening up, very slowly, some elements of their economy. But her order was understandably challenged in court. And originally, a judge ruled against Whitmer's order, saying that it was unconstitutional, an unconstitutional infringement on the rights of the citizens, the residents of Michigan, their constitutionally protected rights. Well, there's something called the Michigan Court of Claims, and they ruled yesterday that the stay-at-home order does not infringe on constitutional rights. According to one news report, the court denied a motion for a preliminary injunction, ruling that the current version of Governor Gretchen Whitmer's executive order and previous versions don't violate rights. According to Attorney General Dana Nessel, this case, which is Martinko et al. V. Whitmer et al., alleged that the mandatory quarantine and interstate travel restrictions in an earlier version violated rights to both procedural due process and substantive due process. Well, Judge Christopher Murray said that the rights are fundamental, but also the public's interests are important. Let's put up a portion. This is a stunning portion of Judge Murray's decision, and I want to just correct something. On the visual, it says the First District Court of Appeals in Michigan. It was actually the Michigan Court of Claims, but nevertheless, everything else in there is correct, and Judge Murray was the guy who made that decision. The beginning of that, of the paragraph that I wanted to cite here is striking to me, and we're going to keep it on the screen for a moment. Those liberty interests are, and always have been, subject to society's interests, society being our fellow residents. And the paragraph goes on saying they, our fellow residents, have an interest to remain unharmed by a highly communicable and deadly virus. And since the state entered the Union in 1837, it has had the broad power to act for the public health of the entire state when faced with a public crisis. But look at those words we have on the screen. Those liberty interests are and have always been subject to society's interests. Now, that's not the case. He's got it backwards. Even though there can be a strong case made for many of the measures that have been taken by states across the country to stop the spread of this virus, the idea that liberty interests, which are fundamental to human beings, we've talked before on this show about natural rights, the idea that they are subject to society's interests is backwards. In fact, society's interests are subject to liberty interests. Don't believe me? Let's look at some of the founders of the country. Thomas Jefferson, in the first quote we've got here, of course, the lead author of the Declaration of Independence, made this note, quote, "Rightful liberty is unobstructed action according to our will within limits drawn around us by the equal rights of others. I do not add within the limits of the law, because the law is often but the tyrant's will, and always so when it violates the rights of the individual." Notice that phrase there on the screen. He says, I do not add within the limits of the law, because law is often but the tyrant's will, and always so when it violates the rights of the people. In other words, the rights of the people come first, then the law comes second, which this is, in a sense, I suppose, the idea of law from what Whitmer has said. However, if we look at James Madison, we'll put up James Madison in a second, but James Madison, of course, is the architect of the Constitution. He's known as the father of the Constitution, the father of the Bill of Rights. And he was the one who put forward the idea of the Great Compromise at the Constitutional Convention that brought together the House and the Senate and set up the structure of our legislative branch. But he was also a fervent advocate for 3 separate branches of government that are co-equal. One of the things that Governor Whitmer is doing, and governors across the country, well, understandably so, I will say, in certain circumstances here, nevertheless, they are amassing their own power and making these decisions unilaterally, and oftentimes with very dubious authority for decisions that they make. But unilateral authority. So we have Thomas Jefferson pointing out that the rights of the people, in other words, the liberty interests, are first, and government is created, by the way, to protect individual rights, to protect individual liberty. Therefore, society, which is the next logical step, because that is an aggregation of individuals, society's interests stem from individuals' interests. But society's interests, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go to James Madison on the idea basically of concentrated power. He said, the accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary, in the same hands, whether of one, a few, or many, and whether hereditary, self-appointed, or elective, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. That is James Madison in Federalist number 47. Remember, the Federalist Papers were the series of essays published in a handful of states making the case for passage of the United States Constitution by the individual states. The accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary, whether of one, a few, or many, whether elective, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. So there you go. James Madison saying having one person with all sorts of power fits in with tyranny. Both Jefferson and Madison talking here about tyranny and concerns of government authority becoming tyrannical and trampling upon individual liberty, individual rights. In other words, liberty's interests, the liberty interests. Now let's go to one other quote from Thomas Jefferson about what history has shown us. He said, experience hath shown that even under the best forms of government, those entrusted with power have, in time, and by slow operations, perverted it into tyranny. Even under the best forms of government, those entrusted with power have, in time, and by slow operations, perverted it into tyranny. Now, Jefferson was not an author of the Constitution. He was the author of the Declaration of Independence. He was not at the Constitutional Convention. But he laid forward in the Declaration the fundamental ideals of this country, which were then built into the U.S. Constitution under Madison's guidance, and a whole slew of other folks, but Madison is known as the father of the Constitution for a reason. In other words, let's put up Judge Murray's quote again. Judge Christopher Murray of the Michigan Court of Claims ruling yesterday that the stay-at-home order does not infringe on constitutional rights because those liberty interests are and always have been subject to society's interests, society being our fellow residents. Let me ask a question. Who determines what is in society's interests And who is supposed to be able to determine the extent to which society's interests, however that has been determined, trump, are more important than liberty interests, are more important than fundamental rights? I'm not saying there aren't reasonable things that the government could be doing as far as some restrictions. And I'm someone who said here in Colorado, hey, I'm good with through April. After April, you need to get things opening up. And you need to do it very strongly. And not a lackluster effort that takes months and months and months. And I think that needs to be the case for most of the country too, if not all of the country at this point. But the reality is that here we have a judge upholding unilateral actions, grandiose powers by an overzealous governor, in my view, who has done some strongly draconian things in the state of Michigan, and focusing on this idea of society's interests trumping liberty interests, again, as determined somehow by the government. That does not jive with the quotes we put up of the founding fathers, such as James Madison and Thomas Jefferson. Again, I believe that we need to take this virus seriously. I said that from the beginning. We need to take appropriate measures, especially personal responsibility. We need to make sure, for example, these rallies and protests that are happening, make sure that you are following through with the social distancing guidelines. Just as a basic, if you're going to gather together, at a minimum, go ahead and make sure that you are following through with the social distancing guidelines. Because we need to do our part. But the way in which this is unfolding, particularly this judge's broad order and the judge's broad statement about liberty interests being always being subject to society's interests, that's a different story. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. You're watching Jimmy at the Crossroads here in partnership with the Washington Examiner. We will take a quick break and we will be back with a lot more here on the show that brings you engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style, day in and day out. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. Stay tuned.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
To Obamacare.
Pardon me.
Pardon me. Oh, hey, you must be Freddie Mae.
Frederick, please.
Yeah, whatever. Hey, listen, I'm Bill Goods with OSLAP. That's Obama's Student Loan Acceleration Program. And we just passed Obamacare, right? We're about to pass another bill to nationalize student loans. It's going to be a whole federal takeover.
Excuse me, sir. Can I get you a drink? Yes. Do you have a Lady Gaga?
Of course. One moment, please.
How does this benefit SCALP, the Society of College Academics for Loan Proliferation?
Well, I'm glad you asked. More loans equals more money. That's more money for everybody. You could raise your tuition excrementally in perpetuity forever, and there's nothing they can do about it. You still got to go to school, right? You still got to get a loan. You ain't got no money. It's a win-win. Oh, and here's another thing. You can't discharge student debt by bankruptcy. You could have 3 student loans. You could go you can't declare bankruptcy on any of them. I don't care how much money you don't got.
But what about the students?
The who?
This.
Remember, my friend, here at OSLAP, we make money the old-fashioned way. We steal it from the students. This is for you.
So what you're saying is, this is a gold mine.
Indeed it is.
A gold mine.
A gold mine.
Stop! Let me tell you what's really going on with student loan debt today. You see, in 2010, President Barack Obama nationalized the student loan system, tying it to Obamacare. At that point in time, student loan debt across the country totaled $800 billion. Now, about a decade later, that number has doubled to $1.6 trillion. This is particularly because the federal government keeps giving out the loans, which has allowed colleges and universities to blithely increase their tuition without any concern. And the federal government just keeps giving out the loans because guess what? If your borrower is deeply indebted with student loan debt, you cannot discharge that debt in bankruptcy. You're stuck with it for life. That needs to change, particularly because there's no risk to the lender. That means the federal government can keep giving out loans, and also there's no risk to the colleges and universities. So they'll just keep raising tuition regardless. There really does need to be a congressional action done to address this student loan crisis in America. And at the Millennial Policy Center, we have some great extensive research on how to do this, including some bills working their way through Congress. So log on to millennialpolicycenter.org today to learn more.
Right on.
Well, it's going to be a pretty good decade. Freddie, let's have another drink.
Oh, let me just...
Ladies and gentlemen, your host of Jimmy at the Crossroads, Jimmy Sengenberger.
Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the show. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. Great to be with you here in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Thanks so much for joining us, being a part of the program. Please be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel if you have not done so already. YouTube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. You can also tweet at me 24/7, 365. You see it right there in the lower third at Sang Center. That's Sang with an E, not an A, Center on Twitter. You can also email me via my website, jimmysengenberger.com. Remember, there's no A, there's no I, there's no U in Sengenberger. It's all E's all the time. Once you know that, Sengenberger is easy. And, of course, also be sure to follow our friends at the Washington Examiner, partners here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, Washington Examiner. Follow them on Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook, as well as WashingtonExaminer.com. So there is, notwithstanding what I was saying in the last segment about some of the, in my view, government overreach that we have seen, the reality is stark when it comes to COVID-19, especially in certain parts of the country, such as the New York City area and in other heavily metropolitan areas where we do see the spread of the virus continuing, and we've seen a lot of death, a lot of tragic stories. But in the midst of tragedy, there's always something uplifting. There are good people doing good things to provide for other good people, to help those who are in need, especially in the nonprofit space when we need all the help we can get for everybody who's suffering right now. And that includes struggling healthcare workers at hospitals who need to have meals when they are working. They need to make sure that their blood sugar is at an appropriate level. They need to make sure that they're also feeling that energy that's needed to get through these very long, drawn-out, and emotionally draining days. So that's why I'm so pleased to do, shall we say, a feel-good COVID-19 story that is in the midst of tragedy. There are people stepping up to help those on the front lines saving lives. Dave Weinberg handles operations at Kosher 19, which is a nonprofit organization delivering kosher meals to hospitals. And he joins us now here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. David, welcome to the show. It's good to have you.
Hi, Jimmy. How are you?
You know, I'm doing well, and I'm always encouraged when I have folks like yourself on who are really taking a tragedy and difficult time and working hard to make it better. So congratulations on what you're doing, and thanks for taking the time today.
Thanks. Happy to be here, and it's nice to have something so good to focus on during these difficult times.
Oh, it absolutely is. So I appreciate it. So first of all, tell us about the Kosher 19 organization and sort of the genesis of what you guys do and how you got to this point, the backstory in essence.
Sure, absolutely. So a little over a month ago, a good friend of mine and a reporter who you might know, Bethany Mandel, had a great idea to send folks meals, healthcare heroes, at hospitals. There had been food going out, but anyone who kept kosher, Jews especially in metropolitan areas, couldn't take advantage of any of that food because of dietary restrictions. So she tweeted out, let's help them, let's feed them, let's get out a meal tomorrow. Overnight, about $10,000 was raised, just an astonishing amount. And so she gave me a call and asked if I could help. My background is I put together a bunch of relief organizations and efforts over the years, from Darfur to helping the New York area during Hurricane Sandy. And so we built a national organization with volunteers across the country to send meals to these frontline healthcare workers. Now, kosher, but when we fulfill a request, we send to the entire unit at once. And in just over a month, we've sent over 10,000 meals to just about 200 hospital units around the country.
I think it's incredible because you found a need not just for food, but an unfilled need for food for those who are keeping kosher, which, I mean, when you have a dietary needs like that, you have to make a point of figuring out what can you do to get those needs filled in the way that you're supposed to go about it. So in terms of the challenge, I mean, how widespread was the difficulty prior to Kosher 19 stepping up and being able to provide kosher meals to hospitals for hospitals to get access to kosher meals?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there are thousands and thousands of healthcare workers across the country and around the world, probably tens of thousands, who keep kosher, and they have nothing to eat. We were hearing from them anecdotally, I'm going an entire shift, 12, 24 hours sometimes, without eating a thing. We can't have that. I mean, when I travel for events and to conferences and I can't eat, maybe I'll have a granola bar, but these are people saving lives. And some of the reason that healthcare workers on the front lines are getting sick is because they're not eating enough and they're not sleeping enough. So that's why we decided to make sure that even if there's just maybe 5 ICU doctors and staff who are keeping kosher, we want to send to all maybe 125 at once. We want to ensure that everyone's eating.
Dave Weinberg, I'm looking here at your website, kosher19.com, and then there's a hospitals page. And when you say hospitals across the country have been getting meals, you mean that. I'm looking at Missouri, New York, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Maryland, D.C., Florida. New York, by the way, is a massive state. Texas. So you literally have a presence in states all around. And you're handling operations for the organization. Tell us a little bit about what it's like being able to address the needs for people so varied across the country, because, again, we're not talking even just regional, although you do have a lot of concentration in the Northeast, such as the New York State area, but we're talking Georgia and Louisiana and Texas. What is involved in that type of a challenge to make sure that you're able to get meals to folks across the country who are in need?
Yeah, Jimmy, it's a great question. And we go back to the fundamentals of communication and systems. So we want to make sure that, one, all the volunteers who are communicating with restaurants, who are communicating with that staff at the hospital, they're communicating the same way every time. They're communicating effectively. We need to know who's going to collect the meal, how many people are in each unit, can they be there, are they going to be there, all that information. We then have our volunteers in that region reach out to a specific restaurant that we know is going to be kosher, certified, and that we've probably worked with before to set up that meal and ensure that they know exactly what they're going to be sending out, at what time, and to who. And we send them with a little thank you card also saying, people from all around the country have donated this, thank you so much, and keep safe. So it's all about systems and communication.
What kind of meals are you providing as far as how they're being made? That is to say, homemade meals, restaurants that provide kosher meals. What kinds of partnerships are you forming? Those kinds of things.
Yeah, great question. So it's sort of a three-part mission. One is to make sure that our frontline healthcare workers get fed. Two is we want to ensure that local, especially kosher restaurants, stay in business. For their location and their specific region, they may be the only restaurant for the community. And now with all this hardship happening, they're in real state of closing. And the other one is we're certainly sending folks from our community to these hospitals and healthcare facilities, and we want to let them know how important you, the healthcare worker, are to us. We want to show that gratitude. So we partnered with specifically kosher restaurants. It's not homemade. It's all done in facilities that are taking the utmost care and abiding by all the regulations possible to make sure that food is done correctly. Sometimes it's pizza, sometimes it's wraps and bagels, and sometimes it's sushi. It all depends on what the needs are of the specific hospital and unit and time. And we take that into account when we make the order.
Again, we're talking with Dave Weinberg, handling operations for Kosher 19 here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. And I think that what we're seeing across the nation right now, Dave, when it comes to the healthcare workers and the struggles that they're going through day in and day out to provide long hours, long shifts, seeing in a lot of parts of the country especially, a lot of death. We've heard very tragic reports about people having died on the way to the hospital and being removed from ambulances, and just so much difficulty that's going on. When you're interacting with hospital workers or the partners that you've got across the country, how are they responding to this? Because I bet that they must have tremendous appreciation for communities around the nation that are willing and able to give back and are stepping up to the plate.
Yeah, a big part of this is being a cheerleader for those incredible healthcare workers. And we get pictures all day long across social media of people not only thanking us, but just thanking others and what they've done. And just that little bit of moment of someone coming in and saying, thank you, right? There are times in different cities across the country where every night people go out and clap and cheer for their healthcare workers around them. Reach out to your friend who's a healthcare worker, or their family. Their family hasn't maybe seen them for days because they come home and stay in isolation. Reach out to your friends and family who have friends who are working in healthcare. Make sure they're okay. Check in with them. Get up their morale as much as possible. We need them, and we need their friends and family.
Dave, let's talk for a moment about how people can help. Look, I'm here in Colorado, for example. I don't see Colorado hospitals listed at this point. Maybe there are that aren't on the website, but I'm sure there are a lot of parts of the country where you're not in yet as far as providing the kosher meals services as you've been working hard to do diligently. How can people across the country help and form partnerships and assist in any way that they can?
Great question. We have had an onslaught of people reaching out to us, and we are doing our very best to keep up to date. Denver and the Colorado region is a good example. I have a whole bunch of follow-up calls. Denver in particular has a really strong Jewish community with folks working in the healthcare system around the Denver area, and we know also restaurants that are in need and perhaps in danger of failing. We have to get them up and running. I would say number one, just like any other relief opportunity, it's actually donations of money that are the most helpful right away because it enables us to do our work best. So if we know that we have a steady flow of cash, we can open up Denver, we can open up Los Angeles, we can open up parts of Alabama and wherever. It doesn't really matter. It's more about having a steady stream of funding. Right now, it's all grassroots. We've raised over $80,000 from nearly 1,000 donors around the country and around the world. There are no major donors. We're not soliciting anyone right now. And our partners, as of yet, are more about delivery and promotional partners.
I love it. Dave Weinberg, a few minutes left with you. And I want to ask you just sort of a more personal question relative to all this. Obviously, this is really hard work you're doing yourself, operations, along with everybody else involved in helping to make Kosher 19 function right now. What is it that drives you personally so much to make a real point of dedicating so much time to giving back to our hospital workers? What's your personal story here?
Gosh, I have a personal drive to do things that are mission focused. It derives from my own religious basis. To do what's called tikkun olam, or fix the world, which is a Hebrew is tikkun olam, and part of that is giving back. And at this moment, where just like a lot of other people, I'm between things, which is the reality. And this opportunity came up that I could put my whole self and my being into doing something good that allows me every day from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to bed to focus on helping people, it's critical to my being and to what I do.
You know, I'm so glad you brought up the faith aspect, which is not surprising given that the organization Kosher 19 is focused on providing kosher meals to individuals who need it across the country. But in terms of this difficult time, so many people are turning to their faith for strength. What is it about your faith, Dave Weinberg, that helps you get through this difficult time, especially because knowing that you and your colleagues working hard for Kosher 19 are helping to provide the healthcare workers across the country with their needs fulfillment when it comes to food, it can't be easy in a sense of seeing and hearing what they're going through, emotionally draining. What is it about your faith that really helps to keep you motivated here?
Yeah, you know, our faith teaches us that even in difficult times, there is a purpose and there is a reason and there is a long-term plan. And that's certainly hard to see when you're in the moment, when you're in difficulty. I remember when my father passed away and I was taking care of him, dealing with something so difficult like that, and that was years ago. You look at your faith and you see, maybe not now, but later you'll see why we did this and why we did that. And there's a purpose to our being and there's a purpose to being a part of a greater fabric.
Very well put. Dave Weinberg, please tell us again some information on how people can get involved, your website, if they want to donate, if they want to make connections, what have you. How can they help?
Sure, the best place to go is kosher19.com, KOSHER19.com. And media and emails are the way to get in touch with us. We'd love to be in touch with you. And again, the best way to help in this case, in this scenario, is make a donation. We really appreciate it. It enables us to send a meal to a healthcare worker at a facility around the country. Thanks so much, Jimmy.
Well, you are very welcome. Thank you for what you're doing. I do want to say, because when it was kind of weird, when you were saying the website, you were going really slowly. So I'm going to say it again, kosher19.com. That's KOSHER19.com. Shalom, Dave, and thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate what you're doing.
Thanks, Jimmy. Have a great day.
Thank you as well. You gotta love when people are stepping up in their communities, taking the initiative to help others in need. They see a need, they fill it, whether it's a business that you're starting or a nonprofit organization trying to provide for those in need. The goodwill and the determination, the dedication, the motivation of individual human beings underscores the point about why it's so valuable to live in a free society. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. We're going to take another break here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Brief segment coming up. Got a couple of topics to dive into on the show, and then after that we will be joined by Rick Newman, columnist at Yahoo Finance, to talk about a few different topics of conversation. I'm very much looking forward to talking with Rick again. He's got a unique perspective. You never can really pin him down. You know, political issues sometimes on some things. I think I know a little bit of his leanings, but he's always got fascinating perspectives, so we'll be back in a little bit as well with Rick Newman from Yahoo Finance. You are watching Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner.
We interrupt this program for a very important presidential message.
I have an issue that's very important right now to the American people and to the people of the United States as well. Our jobs are disappearing to Mexico. I'm going to change that in 2021 when I'm reelected. These jobs are gone. Even the Keebler Cookie Company is no longer, it's in Mexico, folks. It's down in Mexico so far. And those elves are out of a job. Our elves are out of, they don't even speak Spanish. They can't go down there, and they have Mexican elves down there now who don't even understand English making these cookies. I'm going to read the new ingredients just so you're interested. Honey, check. Wheat, check. Oats, check. Sugar, of course. But here's where it gets strange. Chicharrones. What's chicharrones? Jalapeno peppers, folks. If you try these cookies, you're going to burn your tongue off. It'll be gone. You'll have nothing. You won't be able to speak Spanish or English or any other language. Well, I'm going to bring those elves back so quick and so much. They're going to love it. You're going to have your cookies back, and your tongue's going to be fine, believe me. Trump 2020. Thank you very much.
Crikey, that was the biggest bloody mosquito I've ever seen. Wait, coming in. Oh, g'day, mate. You know, after a long day of kangarangling and croc roping, a man can really work up an appetite. Not to mention a whopper of a backache. I know a place, and that's why I like coming into the Back Out Steakhouse. The Back Out is the only place I know where you can sit down in a lumbar support Barca lounger and enjoy a big juicy bandicoot steak or a thick koala chop served by a licensed chiropractor. And as you partake of your meal, your server will provide you with a spinal manipulation, neck twist, the hip alignment, the full Matilda. One visit to the Back Out Steakhouse and your spirits will return like an Abbo's boomerang. So the next time your back goes on walkabout and you're coincidentally, simultaneously craving a slab of cooked meat, waltz on into the Back Out Steakhouse. You not only feel good down under, but all over. Back Out Steakhouse! Good stuff, eh, Skippy? Bloody boomerangs. Back Out Steakhouse!
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
And fans, let's welcome back your host of Jimmy at the Crossroads, Sang Style, Jimmy Sengenberger.
Nathan Matouche working the Matouche magic as producer extraordinaire. Here as we rock and roll back on Jimmy at the Crossroads, engaging, intelligent talk, as he said, Sang Style. As we do our level best to make sense out of nonsense. Coming up in a little bit, Rick Newman, Yahoo finance columnist on a few topics. We will talk with him about a piece he wrote saying, Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell are the two biggest government Republicans we've ever had in high office. Certainly with the president. That's an interesting thing coming from Rick Newman. We will talk to him about that. We will also talk about President Trump's efforts to get at Amazon for whatever reason. He has been trying to go after Amazon, particularly with regards to the contract they have with the post office. We'll talk with him about a piece on that and more coming up. But first, last night something very interesting happened on MSNBC. Chris Hayes in particular, and I think Ari Melber also, took on the Joe Biden allegations, sexual assault allegations, which most of the media has been trying to hide. Take a look at this.
But part of the difficult lesson of the Me Too era is not that every accusation is true and everything should be believed on its face, but that you do have to fight yourself when you feel that impulse. You have to do that in order to take seriously what is being alleged and what the evidence is and to evaluate it. And that is the case with the accusation by a woman named Tara Reade against Joe Biden. Reade briefly worked as a Senate aide in Biden's office in the early 90s. Last year, she told a California newspaper that in 1993, Joe Biden, quote, touched her several times, making her feel uncomfortable. Now, at that time, Reade was one of several women who came forward around that moment with accusations against the former vice president of inappropriate sort of over-physicalness, touching, kissing, or hugging that they say made them feel uncomfortable. Then last month, she made a much more serious allegation, telling first a podcast and later the New York Times that in 1993, Joe Biden pinned her to a wall in the Senate building, reached under her clothing, and penetrated her with his fingers. Reade told the Times that she filed a complaint with the Senate that same year about what happened with Biden. Quote, she said she did not have a copy of it and such paperwork has not been located. Now, Reid also said she complained to Biden's executive assistant, as well as to 2 top aides about harassment by Mr. Biden, not mentioning the alleged assault. All 3 of those people who were interviewed by the Times deny having any memory of a complaint. A spokeswoman for Joe Biden says the allegation is false, and they have strongly denied it. This week, there was also a new development in the story, and that is that Tara Reid's former neighbor at the time went on the record with her name telling Business Insider that in 1995 or 1996, a few years after this, that Reid told her she had been assaulted by Biden. NBC News reached out to Reid's neighbor, who later confirmed by text message the story. This on-the-record reporting from a neighbor, a roughly contemporaneous relaying of the story, has rightly occasioned a new round of coverage and scrutiny, while also creating some serious tension within the progressive coalition.
Yes, indeed, serious tension to the point where I was popping popcorn last night on Twitter as Chris Hayes was being blasted by the Twitter left for that segment. For that segment in which he had the audacity to actually talk about the allegations against former Vice President Joe Biden, which you would expect, if they were consistent, Democrats and liberal media types to do themselves. That they would be taking the initiative to talk about this story, because now there is at least corroboration. I don't think there's enough to make any determinations by any stretch of the imagination, but there's enough corroboration, certainly compared to Brett Kavanaugh. Christine Blasey Ford didn't have corroboration. Nobody said that they were at the party or remembered anything that she was talking about. She didn't tell people at the time. Deborah Ramirez of Boulder, Colorado, was a situation actually where Senator Michael Bennett's office reached out to former Boulder District Attorney Stan Garnett and got him to be her attorney before she even went public with the story, before they even went to the media and to Congress with the story. Michael Bennett more broadly to Congress with that story, certainly to the Republicans. Michael Bennett, U.S. Senator from Colorado, helped line up an attorney before this thing took shape. And Julie Swetnick, and her absurd allegations of high school parties with little Mikey Avenatti being the attorney for Swetnick with these outlandish claims, and the media actually took those seriously, the claims of Swetnick. There was not nearly the level of corroboration. Again, this is not evidence, it's corroboration that she's been consistent for decades now. And yet the media has been largely silent on this issue. Joe Biden has been silent. His campaign has put out denial statements. But you have Chris Hayes on MSNBC actually talking about this and saying, here are facts that we know about what happened according to Tara Reid. And here are the corroborating points, some of them that have been presented, and we need to take this seriously. Well, I got to give Chris Hayes kudos. I got to give Chris Hayes kudos for actually being relatively consistent here. At a minimum, if you're going to bring these sorts of allegations forward, especially in the Me Too era, and really make a big media story out of them and so forth, you need to be consistent and say, okay, the Republican situation, here's their story. Here's the story for the Democrats. Here are the items here. Now, why was it Fire Chris Hayes? Hashtag Fire Chris Hayes was trending for 2 reasons. Number one, because the hashtag got started to get Chris Hayes out, because supposedly by highlighting these allegations against Joe Biden, he's helping to re-elect Donald Trump, because one necessarily means the other by highlighting a sordid potential tale about Joe Biden, these allegations that have some corroboration. He's somehow that's equal to bringing down Joe Biden and propping up Donald Trump. I don't see how those two go hand in hand, how one follows with the other, but that is the claim. And so the Twitter left has been calling now already for Chris Hayes to be fired. The second reason it's been trending is because there are a lot of conservatives tweeting out the hashtag and pointing out that Democrats are trying to get Chris Hayes fired because he's actually highlighting this story. Now, one of the pieces of corroborating support for this story was when Tara Reade's mother called in to Larry King Live, the CNN show that was on the air for decades, in 1993. Shortly after Tara Reade left Joe Biden's office, where she was a staffer in his U.S. Senate office at the time, which is where these allegations come from, and that there was a violation of her in the hallway with, I think it was a hallway, with his fingers. That's the allegation. And now this isn't very detailed, the call, but it was Tara Reade's mother. And it's stunning that this video was recovered. Take a look.
San Luis Obispo, California. Hello.
Yes, hello. I'm wondering what a staffer would do besides go to the press in Washington. My daughter has just left there after working for a prominent senator and could not get through with her problems at all. And the only thing she could have done was go to the press, and she chose not to do it out of respect for him.
Or she had a story to tell, but out of respect for the person she worked for, she didn't tell it.
That's true.
Now, but these are the people who do come to the Lois Romanos, right? The staff worker who says, I want to let you know about what's going on, either with my boss or the guy down the hall.
And a lot of these people have a sense of obligation. They feel that this public official should be accountable if it's something
They're
wrong.
whistleblowers to the press.
Exactly.
You have, and CNN's hardly been covering this. Nobody's asked Joe Biden directly, except vice presidential wannabes have been asked. Gretchen Whitmer, who we talked about earlier, of Michigan, was asked about Tara Reade and those allegations. I think Amy Klobuchar, she was asked. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was asked, not even running for vice president. And also, Bernie Sanders was asked. Joe Biden, not on the record, having answered this question at all. Well, Stacey Abrams has been brazenly campaigning. I don't know whether to admire her for going out there and saying, this is what I want, and I'm going to go all in publicly, literally campaigning, saying I am the best person for the job as vice president of the United States, or if I'm to say that's just shameless and ridiculous and what the heck are you thinking? But Stacey Abrams was asked by Don Lemon about this story as well. Here's a piece of that interview from the other night on CNN.
Is this a credible allegation?
I believe that women deserve to be heard, and I believe that they need to be listened to. But I also believe that those allegations have to be investigated by credible sources. The New York Times did a deep investigation, and they found that the accusation was not credible. I believe Joe Biden. I believe that he is a person who has demonstrated that his love of family, his love of our community has been made perfectly clear through his work as a congressional leader and as an American leader. I know Joe Biden, and I think that he is telling the truth and that this did not happen.
So in 2018, you tweeted it was shameful that Brett Kavanaugh's Supreme Court nomination was being rushed forward and survivors of violence like Christine Blasey Ford deserve to have their voices heard. Are you applying a different standard now?
Not at all. I believe then and I believe now that women deserve to be heard because too often they are not. And Tara Reade deserved to have her story listened to and investigated. What was happening to Christine Blasey Ford was that there was no investigation. There was a rush to move the conversation forward.
No. Get her off the screen. Kudos. I have to give a little bit of credit to Don Lemon. I would love him to ask Joe Biden the question specifically, but at least he put it out there and did the follow-up and made the comparison to Christine Blasey Ford. I will have to. I don't know that I've ever given Don Lemon credit for anything before, but I have to at least give a modicum of credit to him for his Q&A here of Stacey Abrams. But there was no investigation? Are you kidding me? There absolutely was, most certainly in the United States Senate, to the point where she testified, despite not having the level of corroboration that we've got now for this story. Again, corroboration which helps to demonstrate that there's at least value in looking deeper into this story. Not in drawing any sorts of conclusions from this. It just shows that there's consistency and that there's reason to say, okay, maybe we should look into this a little bit more. But Stacey Abrams not applying the Kavanaugh standard here to this situation with Joe Biden, who she would just love to be vice president for. Who she's been saying, oh yes, I'm the best person for the job on The View, on CNN, on NBC, ABC, just everywhere she could go. When she's asked about wanting to be vice president, she goes into her diatribe about why she's the person who should be the vice president for Joe Biden. Good on a few media types for actually stepping up here, taking the initiative, and finally, after weeks, but finally giving a little bit of coverage here, but there aren't nearly as many as need to in order to say, yeah, I've been consistent. And now, of course, they're not going to rake Joe Biden over the coals anywhere near what they did with Brett Kavanaugh. But at least if they cover it, that's a start to show that you're applying some sort of a standard. Although, in my view, we shouldn't be necessarily ferreting these things out in the way that the media has been doing. Because due process is absolutely important, and Brett Kavanaugh wasn't adequately given that. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. You're watching Jimmy at the Crossroads here in partnership with the Washington Examiner. We've got to run to a break. When we come back, Rick Newman will return. He is columnist at Yahoo Finance. You don't want to miss this conversation. As we continue, stay tuned.
Fake cartoons. I'm gonna do the jumble. Who is it? What do you want?
It's me, Don Trump, Sir Elton John. I'm here to ask you a favor.
Oh my gosh, it's Captain Fantastic himself. So much glitter, so many sparkles, so bedazzled.
Well, thank you, Mr. President, I think. When referencing people in your speeches, could you please refrain from using my song titles?
Oh, you mean like when I called Kim Jong-un Rocket Man?
Yes, exactly like that.
Okay,
Yes,
from now on, he's Madman Cross the Water. How would you?
Well, you see, I have a problem with that because
How
it's the
about
same
if I
derogatory...
call Tulsi Gabbard the Island Girl?
I know Tulsi, and I don't think she
Ben
would
Carson. Ben Carson is Honky Cat. That's all.
You can't call Ben Carson Honky Cat. That would be racist.
Why?
Ben Carson's black.
You know, I never noticed he was black at all. I never noticed that. It's funny that somebody like you, Elton John, would point that out to me.
Well, I don't...
All right, fine. From now on, he's Benny and the Jets.
Well, I suppose that's...
Benny and the Jets.
Yes, when Nancy Pelosi inevitably decides to have another round of impeachment, could you please refrain from saying the bitch is back?
It doesn't matter what she says. I'm still standing.
I suppose I'm just going to have to live with that. Fine. If you don't want to help, I'm out of here.
Go on, get out. Hit the yellow brick road so fast and hard. Get out.
Oh, and one more thing, Don Trump. The lyric goes, hold me closer, tiny dancer, not hold me close with tiny hands, sir. Thank you.
Go on, get him out of here. Get him out of here. Let's see. Rhymes with impeachment.
Hi, Tom. Gee, you look terrible.
I feel terrible. Achy, fevery, nauseous.
Ooh, that's too bad. You know, you ought to...
Chills, stuffiness, bloating.
Yeah, you know...
Scratchy, gassy, drippy.
I know! Say, Tom, you should try Wearaflu.
Wearaflu?
Wearaflu is the only medication that actually takes your flu symptoms and hides them at various places inside your body, so that by the time your body finds them all, your flu is gone. In the meantime, you're back to work.
You were right, Ed. Wearaflu lets me ignore my flu symptoms and gets me back to work. Thanks.
Yeah, and thanks for coming in and infecting the rest of the office.
Come out wherever you are with Wearaflu. Take as directed.
Hey, this is Frankie.
Hey, and I'm Angelo. We're the owners of F&A Pizzeria. If you're looking for the best pizza in town, remember us, F&A.
Hey, we got the best crust.
F&A.
We got the best cheese.
F&A.
We got the best sauce.
F&A, man.
Put it all together, what do you got?
F&A.
Yeah, you got that right. F&A.
F&A Pizza on the corner of Hell Yeah Avenue and Dam Straight Street.
And folks, now for the final segment of Jimmy at the Crossroads, episode 34. Let's get you back to your host, Jimmy Sengenberger.
Welcome back. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. Pleasure and a privilege to be with you as always. Thanks for joining us on Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. So great to be with you as always. Once again, if you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel, please do, youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. We now have somewhere around 80 videos up there for you to take a look at. Also, subscribe or like the Facebook page, Jimmy Sengenberger Media Personality, and you can catch all the content there as well. So there are a few different topics I want to dive into here with our final guest here on today's edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. Donald Trump, President of the United States, has an axe to grind, it seems, against Amazon. What's undergirding that, and could breaking up the deal between the post office and Amazon potentially hurt Amazon, if that may be the goal? Also, how big government are the current leaders of the Republican Party, particularly President Trump and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell? Let's talk about that and more with Rick Newman, Yahoo finance columnist and host, who joins us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Rick, welcome back. It's good to have you.
Is this thing on?
Yes, it is. How are you?
Surviving.
Surviving. You know, I think that's what we all are doing right now through all these challenging times. So what have you been doing to help you survive through all this? I mean, obviously, we're fortunate enough to be able to work, especially in the circumstances that we're in right now. But what have you been doing otherwise to sort of keep trucking on?
Well, we're very busy at Yahoo Finance. I mean, we're covering what's happening in the markets, which is a lot, the recession, all the layoffs and everything. Our traffic is way up. So we're keeping busy. We're broadcasting remotely like many other networks are. I'm lucky. I live right outside of New York City, which is a hot spot for sure. But I live in the suburbs. I'm able to go running and for the most part stay away from people, sort of go out in the middle of the street if I have to or way off the path. And I'm going to be planting my garden during the coming weeks. So I've got a few things at least to take my mind off being stuck at home.
Ah, that's good. It's always helpful when you can be preoccupied amidst everything, especially. Rick Newman, I just want to get your thoughts real quick on what we've seen in the stock market and then dive into some of your stories, just because it's been an interesting phenomenon. We spent some time talking yesterday. The last couple of days have been a positive for the market, despite the negative 4.8% GDP growth in the first quarter, particularly because of the last 3 weeks of March, when we were starting to see these economic shutdowns take place. And then also, when we got into the month of April, things started getting even more difficult. So second quarter, we're expecting an even steeper decline, which means we will be and technically are in a recession, 2 consecutive quarters of negative economic growth or economic contraction. But at the same time, the market was up a couple of days. Now today, it's down a bit. But what do you make of that dynamic? Why do you think that is?
There's a giant divergence between what we're seeing in the real economy and what we're seeing in the stock market. So the stock market has really recovered quite nicely from the lows it hit in March. And we've had a lot of people on Yahoo Finance trying to guess what is the market reading into the situation. And basically, it seems like the market is pricing in a V-shaped recovery. That's we bottom out and then we shoot back up pretty quickly. And there's nothing disrupting that. It's a linear recovery, and I think that also suggests the market anticipates that there will not be some kind of setback coming with the virus, a second wave, or other problems as states let businesses reopen. So the real question is the market right or wrong? And of course, nobody ever knows, but it seems to me that the market is way ahead of the economy at this point. We're here. So we've been hearing about possible vaccine breakthroughs or treatment breakthroughs. But even if everything goes right with that news, it still is easily going to be a year before there's a vaccine available for mass distribution. And markets just don't seem to be anticipating, another 12 to 18 months of at least partial lockdowns where people can't go back to work. So the market is the most optimistic player in the economy right now.
I think the one thing that really helps to explain this, and I think you put your finger on it, is the idea from investors that reopening will happen sooner than later. My view on the trajectory of the economy is how quickly governments allow it to reopen, which is only part of the equation, because then businesses have to make the determination. We're allowed to open, let's say. Is my business ready for it? Is it appropriate? What's the liability question? How is that going to be answered? Will businesses be held liable if a customer goes into a restaurant or to a movie theater and ends up contracting coronavirus and then we have a bit of a spread? That's a question that hasn't particularly been answered yet, at least to my knowledge. So that's only part of the equation, is when the economy officially is allowed to reopen in various states, then businesses have to take the ball and run with it. But I do think investors at the very least are optimistic about states sooner than later beginning that reopen process. And I'm not a believer, Rick Newman, that it is tenable to expect a long-term sort of lockdown like we're seeing right now. I don't think that that's practical to happen, but we never know. I mean, some governors are insisting that they want to keep things locked down out into potentially months out in the future, if not longer. So what do you make of that?
I think it's a misperception that governors somehow want to keep economies closed and businesses closed longer than necessary because to their mind, public health trumps the economy. I mean, public health is the economy at this point, and no one's talking about. The presumption in this discussion is often that, as long as governors say businesses can reopen, that everybody's just going to go back to what they were doing before the coronavirus. And I think that's a completely terrible assumption. If you have virus resurgences, everybody's going to know about it. If the hospitals start filling up again, you're not going to persuade people to go back to malls and movie theaters. I mean, if you say everything's open, but the virus is now spreading again and more people are dying and we're hearing about more, horrible things at nursing homes and the rest, people are not going to go back out. So, you need public confidence is crucial to this whole discussion. And that's the thing not too many people are talking about. So right now, in most states, the governors are popular. Voters do approve of the job the governors are doing. But if the governors blow it and people start to lose confidence in the governors making the right decision, to my mind, that's the worst possible outcome, because then you're going to end up having to keep people home longer than you would have otherwise. And at best, you'll get a W recovery where you bounce down, you bounce up, and then you bounce down again. And who knows how long you stay at the bottom the second time. To me, that's the worst case outcome.
Again, Rick Newman is our guest, Yahoo Finance columnist, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. I don't want to delve into this aspect of the discussion longer, except to just say that while I agree with you, public health is economic health, I also think that economic health is public health. And so if you don't allow for the opportunity for businesses that can function to start reopening in areas where it's maybe prudent to do so, I think that will have long-lasting repercussions. But I want to ask you about something different. You've written about this. Very interesting. I'm just going to read the title here. Trump and McConnell are the biggest big government Republicans ever. That is a very strong term. What do you mean?
I guess you have to go back to the 1800s and the beginning of the Republican Party if you're really going to make a claim like that. But I think it holds up. I just looked at the latest numbers from the Congressional Budget Office on federal spending as a percentage of GDP. And based on what the stimulus programs we've had during the last 6 weeks, it looks as if federal spending is going to add up to 30% of GDP this year. That is, we have not had that much federal spending as a percentage of the overall economy since World War II. That is the highest level since 1945, and it's probably going higher because we're probably going to get more stimulus. And of course, Mitch McConnell is in charge of the Senate, which Republicans control. And he's the one formulating and signing off on all these spending bills, along with Nancy Pelosi in the House, obviously, and Trump is signing them. So I'm not saying they should necessarily be doing anything different. I think I'm just pointing out the irony that it's basically the once small government conservative Republican Party that is initiating a lot of these giant spending bills and is probably going to be passing more of them.
I know. And guess what? I'm not a big fan of a lot of it because I believe, and we talked about this before, I believe that if the government is forcibly shutting down companies in particular, that there is a role for providing some support. But the way in which they've gone about this, massively expanding the Federal Reserve power, spending trillions of dollars in these programs and what have you, some of them may be prudent. I mean, I have some concerns about the Paycheck Protection Program, but I think the idea is fairly sound. I think that some of these points of assistance, unemployment insurance, expanding that to people who've been laid off or furloughed, not even laid off necessarily because of this crisis. I think it makes sense to provide them support. I'm not a fan of the $1,200 per adult payment that's been going out there, or the $600 expansion of the unemployment benefits, or some of these other provisions that Republicans have put in. And I can't really disagree with you. The idea of the biggest government Republican, certainly within the context of this crisis, and it's rather stunning. But at the same time, if you think about it, I mean, Donald Trump is not someone who comes at the office of the presidency as an ideological conservative. He's not an ideological person. Now, he's governed in a lot of conservative ways as far as regulations and the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and what have you, but by and large, he's not, and we saw that bear out with the free trade, attack on free trade that he's done with the trade war and so forth. So I'm not exactly surprised to some extent, but it is interesting.
I'm not even sure political ideology applies here. I mean, it's one thing to have a political ideology when you don't have to make decisions that are basically life or death decisions in a crisis. But look what happens in a crisis. I mean, I think it kind of doesn't matter what party you are or what your ideology is. You must respond to what the public wants and needs from you. And I think in this instance, I mean, if you want to have the argument, what should the government do? Even conservatives would argue that at a bare minimum, what the federal government should do is be the activist of last resort and only deal with problems that no other entity can deal with. And I think this coronavirus pandemic and the recession that it has caused, a severe recession, I think this fits the definition of something that no other entity can effectively deal with. I mean, that's why we have a federal Defense Department instead of 50 state militias. You could argue with President Trump's response to this. I mean, he is, in terms of whose responsibility for testing strategy, procurement of protective equipment and all that kind of stuff, he basically is saying, no, I think we should have 50 state militias. The states should all be fighting it out among themselves. I think that's not the right approach. But look, I mean, the economics of this, I think, are pretty clear. It's better to plow money into this ahead of time and resolve it as quickly as you can than to hold back and then just let the thing go on for years and years, which it probably would, and the ultimate cost would probably be higher. So in a crisis like this, most politicians turn out to be pragmatists because there's not much of an alternative.
Well, I'm not convinced that a lot of what's being done is the pragmatic way of going about it. But it's an interesting situation, to be sure, from an historical perspective, where after Republicans were complaining for 8 years under Barack Obama about his growth and expansion of government, that suddenly you've gotten to President Trump, who, by the way, I look at the Defense Production Act and his use of that. I vehemently oppose it. I think that it is central planning, and I'm not a fan of that particular approach, especially because I don't believe that it was necessary. But also, when I look at the Trump administration, just in the past few years, I mean, the trade war certainly is not a limited government, free market approach to governance, and that preceded the crisis that we're in now, and only now. And I'm curious your thoughts on this, actually, Rick Newman. Now we're seeing an uptick in the assertions that, hey, we need to get rid of globalism and we need to start expanding protectionism and making all of these things specifically here in the United States, which is taking what President Trump has been saying for the past 3 years and doing and ramping that up to a whole new level. What do you make of that discussion?
I get bored with all of the isms and discussion of the isms. You know, these general ideas that a global trend is going either this way or that way. I mean, obviously, Trump has reined in globalism and he has impeded free trade with tariffs, not just on Chinese imports, but on imports from a lot of other countries on certain categories of goods. I mean, I'm not, to my mind, this is not the end of globalism, and it's not as if trade is going to end. And just as Trump came into office and he, you know, abruptly changed the policies of the previous administration on certain things to become more protectionist and less global, the next administration could just as easily change back. I mean, I think, you know, what Trump has done is really based on one man's view of the world, and Trump is going to be gone either next year or 5 years from now. And I'm not sure anything Trump has done is going to be lasting. So, you know, and to this extent, private enterprise has a role in this, which obviously it does. I mean, private enterprise is extraordinarily good at finding the most efficient way to operate given whatever the rules are. So the rules changed under Trump, and private industry is figuring that out as we speak. And if they change again, private industry will figure it out. You know, globalism has many advantages, and free trade has many advantages that are kind of hard to point to. But I mean, if you study and research what free trade accomplishes in terms of raising living standards everywhere, including here in the United States, I don't think we're going back to something else.
I certainly hope that the free trade regime, so to speak, that we've had for decades now returns, or at the very least continues where it's been and doesn't roll back further. Rick Newman, our guest Yahoo Finance columnist. One more topic of conversation. There's been discussion about whether or not the U.S. Postal Service should be bailed out amidst all of this. President Trump not on board with that idea. Of course, he's also been critical of the post office for its deal with Amazon as far as shipping packages. It does seem to be an extra grind against Amazon and Jeff Bezos for whatever reason. I'm curious your thoughts on, I mean, I don't think that it's simply because of his frustration with and displeasure with and distaste for Amazon that he opposes a U.S. Postal Service bailout. I don't support a Postal Service bailout. I don't want to get into that discussion, though, but I more want to get into what your thinking is on why you believe that it is the primary reason he opposes the bailout. And then also what you make of this distaste that the president does have for Amazon and how it's manifested itself in criticism and so forth of the post office.
I don't think Trump has mounted one piece of coherent criticism against either Amazon or the Postal Service. And to some extent, it's unknowable because Amazon's contract with the Postal Service is confidential. I mean, it's both organizations are entitled to confidentiality in a private business, you know, private sector business deal. But what we do know about the Postal Service is that package delivery for companies like Amazon and all the other online retailers, this is its most profitable line of business. And there is absolutely no reason to think that Amazon gets a sweetheart deal from the Postal Service. You know, that has to be, the rules are that the Postal Service has to make a deal with Amazon at market rates. And why would the Postal Service be more favorable toward Amazon than anybody else? I mean, there's no reason why they would. Amazon is a huge shipper. So it would make sense by the basic rules of business that Amazon's rates would be set relative to the volume of packages. And anybody who does any kind of business knows that right. Volume discounts are a totally normal thing. I mean, I've never seen a single piece of criticism of Amazon's deal with the Postal Service that makes any sense from Trump.
Well, here's the thing, too. I mean, the post office, the one thing that I would say has really been the lifeblood for it over the past several years, keeping it alive when it was on its deathbed, so to speak, in a lot of ways, financially speaking,
It's always on its
packages.
deathbed, by the way.
But the packages really, and the advent of Amazon and other mail services, packages have been really keeping this thing alive because they lose money on first-class mail service, but they have in the past been able to at least make enough to stay around, in some cases doing okay in some years because of the package delivery service, which is what the aspect of the post office arrangements that Trump is criticizing vis-a-vis Amazon.
Yeah, I mean, the story of the Postal Service is, this is a very complicated topic, and I know you don't want to go down this rabbit hole.
Sure.
But the Postal Service is not allowed to operate like a normal company. If it were allowed to operate like a normal company, first thing it would do would be to close all of its underperforming locations, which might be half of all post offices. I mean, if this were UPS or FedEx, they would not have a freaking post office in every single zip code, including rural areas where there's hardly any business, because it's not economical. It's a money-losing business strategy, but the Postal Service is not allowed to operate like a normal business. It's not allowed to close underperforming locations. It's not allowed to branch out into other products that might be more profitable and make up for some of the losses. And by the way, the Postal Service is required to deliver to every address in America at the same price. It cannot charge the cost of delivery. It has to charge what the price of a stamp is. I mean, these are just insane rules for any business would lose money under these rules. So, the Postal Service has really struggled as mail volumes have declined because of email and the digital revolution. So you're right. Package delivery has been a bright spot. By the way, what Amazon is doing is developing its own logistical network and its own delivery system,
right,
so that it doesn't have to rely on the Postal Service. And guess what? If you priced Amazon out of the Postal Service and did what Trump wants, which is raise rates 4 times, Amazon wouldn't pay 4 times the rate.
No,
they'd go to somebody else
or do their own
system.
Yeah, ramp
And
up
the
their
Postal
own
Service
system.
loses its customer.
Right, absolutely. No, I totally agree with that point. So in terms of the post office arrangement with Amazon, I mean, clearly, it's clear to me that this is a proxy for President Trump not liking Amazon. What do you think explains that?
It's not that he doesn't like Amazon. It's that Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post, which like most mainstream news organizations, exposes all of Trump's lies, keeps a running list of every lie he tells, criticizes all his erratic behavior and his policies that don't make sense and his flip-flops. So his beef is with Jeff Bezos and the Washington Post, but he's trying to punish them through Amazon.
Okay. No, that makes sense to me. Now, I'm not a fan of the Washington Post myself, but the idea that President Trump would be consistently going after Amazon in these ways when it's been, look, one of the big reasons why people are able to get through this crisis right now where we're stuck at home is because of the advent of Amazon, which is providing all sorts of opportunities here.
Yeah, look, Amazon is keeping a lot of households afloat. Their only source of toilet paper and many other things they need. And I should point out, Amazon is consumers love Amazon. They are consistently one of the top 10 and sometimes one of the top 5 most liked or most admired brands in the reliable and credible surveys that measure that sort of thing. Most consumers do not have a beef with Amazon at all. They love the fact that they can get 2-day delivery and access to all the stuff on the site. There have been issues with working conditions for Amazon workers, so they do get some flack from workers' advocacy groups. They're not unionized. There are complaints about tough working conditions and possible coronavirus infections with a lot of those workers on the job. But this is a remarkably innovative company. It's a great American success story. It's a kind of, this is the kind of company we want to have in America. And by the way, in the middle of this horrible recession, Amazon is hiring thousands of people.
It's true. No, I agree. And I think that the behemoth that Amazon has become is a result of the fact that consumers have said, this is something we like. It is the market at work bringing about a company like Amazon, which has done tremendous good. Now we could have another discussion another day about the balance, some of the concern over the tech products and some of the privacy issues, Ring and Alexa and so on and so forth. But that would be something we'd have to keep for another time. Rick Newman, always great to check in with you.
People are buying those products, man.
That's true.
People are filling their houses with those products.
Absolutely. And you know what? More power to them. I totally think that if people want to go out and buy a product, they should be able to do it and make their own determinations. But we got to let you go there. Rick Newman, Yahoo Finance columnist and show host, thanks so much for joining us. Always great to check in with you, my friend. Be well.
Thanks, Jimmy. See you.
Thank you. Again, Rick Newman from Yahoo Finance joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Always an interesting discussion with Rick, so glad to have him here on the program. Well, that is it for us today, but we've got another day coming up tomorrow. It's Friday, working on, I think we're going to do a free to choose Friday tomorrow. What it's going to be, still shaping things together there. But we've got Friday coming, the end of the week. My goodness, but we will be back tomorrow. My thanks to Nathan Matouche, producer extraordinaire. My thanks to Dave Weinberg and Rick Newman for joining us today, our partners at the Washington Examiner. To you for watching, please be sure to subscribe if you haven't done so already. YouTube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. Be sure to check out all of our content there, as well as on the Jimmy Sengenberger Media Personality Facebook page. Gotta love what we can do nowadays with this technology. And of course, God bless America.